They're mellow. This would
But
be
I
very,
over prepped for it, and this one I'm just like coming in like whatever.
Yeah, trust me, you guys.
Yeah,
You over prep
You
for
got some-
this?
No,
I was gonna say, you know,
I did not.
I got prep for this one.
the last one I had notes. Like I had extensive notes, and it just ended up sounding like I was reading.
Yeah, I mean, the knowledge in your head and Rick's head,
Yeah, you want it to be
we're gonna
more of
hit
a
a home run.
conversation than anything. That's
it'll be a home run, don't worry.
Yeah.
Rick gave a speech to our board Friday morning that was
Yeah.
a home run also.
Awesome. Where
Don't
was
let
the
that go to
meeting?
your head, Rick. and
He's a
Jeff
good
Carey,
speaker.
too. Jeff Carey
Great,
gave
fun.
it was great.
Awesome. Well, welcome back to Save It for the Blind podcast. I'm here with Carson Odegaard, our president, John Carlson, Ellen Weir of Weir Water Law and Policy, and Rick Ortega, the general manager of the Grasslands Water District. So thank you guys so much for coming on. We're going to be talking about the grasslands and the importance of it in California and just the complexities of working down there. So thank you guys for coming on. Appreciate it.
Good to be here.
yeah. We'll kind of start off. So, for those that are unfamiliar, what is the grasslands? Like somebody says, "Oh, I'm going to hunt the grasslands," or "I've driven past the grasslands," and there's somebody from out of the state or maybe in the state that doesn't know what it is. Can you give us a description or your best word for word of what you would tell somebody if somebody asked you that question? What is the grasslands?
Sure. No, it's I think the broader question is that it's an ecological area. And so we refer to that as the Grassland Ecological Area. And within that Grassland Ecological Area is a large collection of contiguous wetlands, freshwater wetlands that are predominantly managed wetlands. So we deliver water supply, surface water supply, and groundwater out to this complex on an annual basis, really to support migratory birds along the Pacific Flyway.
Yeah, and I would add that it's a collection of private lands, state wildlife areas, including the oldest in the state, and national wildlife refuges, and contiguously makes up hundreds of thousands of acres. It's the lowest lying area in the kind of Merced County region on the border of Stanislaus County. And so it's the historic floodplain of the San Joaquin River. And it's been preserved intact and never really farmed, not much of it, for millennia. So it's a pretty special place.
So most use out there is just waterfowl hunting, or is there other use kind of other than waterfowl hunting in that area?
So predominantly habitat. So we have different types of habitats that associate with the wetlands themselves. So we've got riparian forests and uplands. And vast grasslands, and that's kind of where it gets its name from. And then in addition to the seasonal nature of the managed wetlands. So this time of year, we're drawing down the marsh, grasses are growing, all the moist soil plots that are not only occurring on the private lands, but also on the public lands, on the state CDFW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lands. And then we've got within that complex also wildlife beneficial agriculture. So a lot of pasture land, most of which is under long-term conservation easements with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the vast majority of this landscape, this 240,000 acres is the ecological area boundary, is protected under conservation easement.
Can you kind of talk to the history of the Grasslands Water District and the importance of our partnership with California Waterfowl and some of the things that we've been able to accomplish over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Grassland Water District was formed as an association of land and cattle, duck hunters and cattle grazers in the 1940s when the Bureau of Reclamation, the federal government, came in and was planning to build the Millerton Lake / Friant Dam on the San Joaquin River. So that dam was intended to divert the flow of the San Joaquin River, which is California's second largest river, to irrigation interests to the north and mainly to the south. As a result, it would dry up, the historic floodplain of the river, and there were a lot of settlements made to provide substitute water for farming interests and landowners along the river. But the historic cattle clubs and duck clubs that were mainly flooded naturally were not really settled out as part of that deal that was brokered in the late 1930s. As a result, the landowners and grazing folks out there gathered together, formed the Grassland Association. and started to try to fight for water. The water rights that were provided to the association, which then became the Grassland Water District in the mid 1940s, were kind of on an as available basis. And so for 45 years, the grasslands continued to receive water either from the San Joaquin River or from the federal government's new Delta Mendota Canal, which provides that substitute water on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. As available, and there was a lot of water available between the 40s and the 80s in California, and so the clubs were able to survive. We have over 150 private duck clubs and a half a dozen state refuge units and a similar number of federal refuge units. But in the 1990s, water started to dry up, right? There wasn't enough to go around. There was a really big drought, and the grasslands got cut off from their water supply. So again, the district fought for a federal law that would require the Bureau of Reclamation to continue to provide water on a more reliable basis to the wetland units. And the CVPIA, the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, was passed, and that included guaranteed water supplies for 19 refuges in the Central Valley. So that includes a number of refuges in the Sacramento Valley, and also about about a dozen in the San Joaquin Valley. So we've been supplying water through our district to the refuges in the grasslands for that long, but that's a long time to maintain managed wetland habitat too. So we have worked really hard with California Waterfowl Association over decades to maintain, restore, and enhance the productivity of the marsh there, and it's been such a success. It's a beautiful area. It has amazing habitat, and it's only because of the water infrastructure, the partnerships we've done on restoring those habitats and maintaining them in the state that they, it's a managed wetland ecosystem. So it's kind of like we're farming ducks. There's a lot, like Rick said, there's a lot of irrigation, a lot of maintenance and moist soil management that happens out there, but it really has managed to remain in a near natural state for this long because of partnerships with organizations like CWA.
Do you guys have the water issues that, a lot of the headlines we see, obviously Klamath is a big one because that's Klamath, but we see or tend to hear about a lot more, Sacramento Valley doesn't have water rights country. Do you guys see those same issues down in the grasslands areas?
We are lucky.
Well,
go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, no, we definitely, struggle each year to provide and acquire adequate supplies on a schedule that the habitat actually needs. So there's big challenges. We're south of the Delta, so our water supply has to be essentially pumped across the Delta into the South Delta, enter into the federal facilities, move down into the San Luis unit, the federal unit. So we struggle with the same challenges for south of Delta pumping that you hear headlines about agriculture or municipal, especially during times of drought. A portion of our water supply is fairly reliable. That's sort of our historic supply is what we call level 2 supply. And that is on basically a priority basis. And so long as that we're not in sort of a critically dry Shasta critical situation, we're going to receive 100% of that level 2 supply. Another third of our supply is actually less reliable, less secure. The Bureau of Reclamation usually is able to acquire on the open market about half of the water supply that we need. And this is water supply that's really important for maintaining these wetlands to optimal germination, providing subsequent irrigations, providing brood habitat, being able to flood up for the early migrants. Really, the shoulder seasons are what are dependent on what we call incremental level 4 supply. So a little bit of complexity there, but we're facing challenges not only with hydrology and new regulatory pressures that make it harder to move water out to our complex, but we're also struggling with a lot of financial issues. The restoration fund, the CVPIA restoration fund that we depend on almost exclusively, has lost a significant amount of its collections, will no longer be collected moving forward, resulting in about a third of that fund going away. And so we're trying to backfill, get really creative, working very creatively with South of Delta Agriculture and some of the Bay Area municipal agencies on really rethinking how we can continue to provide adequate supplies on the schedule that the habitat needs it, with the reality of more expensive markets, water markets, and also diminishing funds overall.
Yeah, I would add that we're pretty lucky being a CVPIA refuge. And I think what we went through in the 80s with being told that our water was no longer going to be there is what I'm seeing around the valley, including in the Klamath, in the East Grasslands, in the Tulare Basin, the Butte Sink. So, we stood up and fought back 45 years ago, and now I think it's time to try to extend some of that creativity and energy to other parts of the state that have historically just received spill water, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of waters, a lot of flooded agriculture, and that is starting to slowly go away. And I think a lot of habitat owners and managers are starting to see that they need water rights. They need to figure out what their water rights are. And if they can't do that, they need to get creative about finding solutions, finding funding to buy water or install infrastructure to help them utilize the water they have. That's my fear, is that there's a lot on the fringes of our area in the San Joaquin Valley, and I see it elsewhere, that is starting to really come up against questions of how reliable is that water going to be into the future as scarcity, just accelerates.
And can you speak to the different types of water rights a landowner may have, like a riparian water right compared to something else, and what does that mean for the landowner?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of clubs around the state and a lot of refuges are located near waterways, so they could claim riparian rights, but they just never have, right?
What
Those
claiming,
aren't recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what does claiming riparian water rights mean?
Claiming a riparian
What does that
right
mean?
means you file a statement with the state water board, and you say, I'm using this water, I'm exercising my right, I have a right. Once you trigger that, though, you have to start reporting your water use. And with a lot of these clubs, it's very, informal, it's very natural, it's a lot of flooding and things like that. And so they're not really on record as having water rights. Sometimes there's not if you're just relying on floodwater from your neighbor's farm, right? If a tailwater's coming into the field, you don't necessarily have a right to demand that upstream owner continue to do that. And so the nature of those rights is very reliant on your neighbors, right? That's what's happening in the Klamath, is that those districts up there, those farming districts, they own and operate the canals and have historically provided their water to the downstream refuge units. And so that cooperation, that ability to work with your neighbors and figure out agreements or solutions or figure out what kind of water rights you have is pretty important. But we in the grasslands have strange water rights because they're contractually based with the federal government, right? So right now, all of the refuges in the Central Valley are renegotiating those contracts. They've been in place for 25 years, and they're coming up for renewal under the federal law. And so this is a really big time for a lot of the CVPIA refuges and trying to get new contracts, make sure they're protective, and really go into a negotiation position with the federal government. So no water rights are guaranteed forever, right? You're going to have to work at it, maintain them. There's always different nuances. The only other type of water right that California really acknowledges is an appropriative water right, and that's where you're artificially taking water from a stream through a canal and bringing it to a land that's not adjacent to that waterway. Those two have to be filed with the state water board. You have to, claim them, and that's where that first in time, first in right water system that we have in California comes from. So the earlier you file, the more secure and senior your water rights are. And so it's a hodgepodge here. Water rights are really complicated, and that's not even getting into groundwater. So now
that's just surface water.
Now the state's regulating groundwater, right? And that is going to lead to a lot of pressures on various habitats that have turned to groundwater in times of scarcity and that are now being folded into these groundwater sustainability plans and management systems that are really new. They're brand new, and there's not a lot of voices for I think hunters and wetland advocates yet in that process. Yeah. So that's another interesting twist in water in California.
Are those federal contracts always 25 years? Or
no.
Do they vary?
They were when we signed ours.
Okay.
And They are now usually 40 years.
Oh,
However, there was a law enacted that allowed irrigation and farming agencies to repay their debt to the federal government in exchange for permanent contracts.
wow.
We don't know yet what our contract's going to be, but we're definitely going to shoot for at least 40 years. So that would be a big win, I think, for the habitats around the state if we were able to achieve that.
Yeah.
We've been talking about refuges. In the grasslands, the number of clubs is large, private clubs that also need that water and provide habitat for waterfowl. Ellen and Rick, approximately how many clubs are in your footprint, private duck clubs?
We have 165 in our direct service area, but if you include the east side clubs for the ecological area as a whole, closer to 200 clubs.
Wow.
And so then they vary in size from a single owner situation up to a club like the Hollister Land and
Right.
Cattle with over 100 members, or the Gustine is another
Yep.
very large club, the Salinas, and then you've got everything in between, from a few hundred acres, one big super pond, up to a few thousand acres where they've got the ability to have a sanctuary and upland habitat. And so it's a tight knit community, and everything is sort of consolidated. And so Sac Valley guys come down to the grasslands, and it's a little alarming how close everyone is, and how noisy it gets right at shoot time.
Yeah.
They're used to having 10,000 acres between them and the next rice blind.
Yeah.
So it's always an eye opener in that regard.
When the teal are in town, it's amazing. I've been there several times for shoot time, and it's eye opening. It's
Yeah.
great. But one thing I don't ever want the public to lose sight of, or I want them to learn more about it, is the value of all these private wetlands and what kind of habitat is being provided. The refuges are very important, but if we lost all those private people and all the habitat they provide in the fall for wintering birds, it would be a catastrophe.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. We call ourselves a refuge because we're the only privately owned and managed. We are a local public agency that provides the water, but the Grassland Water District landowners are private owners who put their own time, money, and sweat equity on the table to maintain that habitat. We call ourselves a refuge, but we're the only private one that has received water under the CVPIA. So that's a real shorthand, but our landowners in that private habitat that makes up about 65,000 acres of contiguous wetlands in the San Joaquin Valley, which has lost over 95% of its historic wetlands. It's just amazing the amount of dedication and habitat that is out there under private ownership.
Yeah, two-thirds of the remaining habitat is actually privately held, and that's always a surprise to folks, that only 1/3 is managed by both the state and federal agencies. And if you think through that, when we have this private financial backbone that has played such an instrumental role in pushing back on the federal government and the state government and unreasonable regulation or different treatment. And so you really have to commend what I call the sportsman conservationists that have protected this area, that it would have gone away, frankly. And it definitely wouldn't have been managed to the degree that it is. These folks are spending a tremendous amount of money annually. We did some demographic work. Upwards of $100 million annually is spent just in the Central Valley on maintaining managed wetlands and optimizing, just pushing as much food as possible out, as much seed and biomass and invertebrates as you possibly can, because we're trying to feed 10 million birds on 5% of the remaining habitat. And the only way to do that is in a managed setting. So the hydrology's changed tremendously. We've got to get that water supply out to there. There's a lot of maintenance associated with just the conveyance alone, because we're moving, we deliver upwards of 300,000 acre feet annually. That's a tremendous amount of water supply, and a very valuable commodity at that. And so we have a state-of-the-art monitoring and measuring. We take this stuff very seriously, but we also play a very vital role in terms of providing flood control and flood safety during these climate extremes. We're moving more water through our system than we ever have. We're innovating new ways. We're rethinking our conveyance system. A lot of the projects that we deliver on our conveyance are partnerships with CWA. CWA has really been a huge partner for us throughout, sort of our existence. As soon as CWA was formed, they started partnering very closely with the Grasslands on everything, policy, on regulations, on restoration work. Really an arm that we don't have. We just don't have the bandwidth and ability to deliver all of what the habitat needs, and that's where CWA has played such a vital role.
Can you guys talk to the where we've came from the 80s with toxic water, what we've learned, and where we are today with farming practices and Clean Water Act, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So like many clubs and wetlands in California, the district used to rely on drain water from nearby agriculture for a lot of its water supply. And in the 1980s, there was more testing and some alarmist kind of things coming out from the Fish and Wildlife Service and biologists who were starting to see deformities of fish and birds, baby birds, from selenium. And Rick can talk about this, but the bioaccumulation of this naturally occurring selenium in our area because of the drain water. Basically, when the west side was developed for irrigated agriculture, they built a big drain to take that water, because we have a very high water table in our area. And so to protect the root zone of the crops, you have to kind of drain the irrigation water away. And that irrigation drain was supposed to go all the way to the delta, but it never made it. There were, a bunch of objections to bringing this kind of salty water all the way to the delta. And so it stopped at Casterson Reservoir, and that was just a terminal reservoir really close to habitat that collected the drain water. And as the selenium began accumulating in the water, they started to see deformities in birds, particularly shorebirds, but also waterfowl. And there was a big emergency. I mean, it was kind of a biological disaster that was happening and unfolding. And so a lot of negotiations, orders from the state and federal agencies came down, and they had to stop accumulating that water in Casterson. The reservoir was filled in, it was restored. It is now a unit of the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge system, and the drainage has slowly declined over time. So the farmers to our south have really worked hard to minimize their drainage, to change their agricultural practices, to recirculate and to irrigate salt-tolerant crops and try to maintain their irrigation and their drainage within their boundaries to the extent that they can't. The stormwater is still going to come. We're still going to get rain. And so we still work closely with those districts to manage the discharge of stormwater in a way that bypasses the grasslands. So it's called the Grassland Bypass Project. And so a portion of the historic drain is still used for stormwater discharge through mud slough and into the San Joaquin River. It's heavily regulated by the state. And we've been trying to be more supportive there's a historical dispute between hunters and wetland managers in the 80s and 90s that got pretty heated. And our old board members will tell you about times they pulled up to their board meetings and there were camera crews in the parking lot and lots of kind of threats being thrown around, and it got really heated. But now I think, it's more of a let's monitor, let's regulate, let's try to make sure that this water doesn't enter the habitat. And let's try to minimize it. So it's really, I think, through a combination of irrigation efficiencies and just a whole lot of energy being paid attention to, we've really kind of minimized that threat. And so we have water quality standards in our district and the refuges and the water that we accept for habitat purposes that is really protective of wildlife. And we've been able to maintain that separation between the agricultural drainers and the wetland managers. It makes our water supplies and the reliability of bringing in water from outside much more important because we can no longer rely on agricultural drainage for our water supply. But it's been a real success story, I'd say, in the amount of pollution that has been reduced over the last few decades. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, that's right. Over 95% of the salt and selenium that was being discharged to the San Joaquin is no longer taking place due to the Grassland Bypass Project. So that was a big help. A lot of that water moved through us, not just through the San Luis Drain, which is kind of a confined channel, But a lot of that water supply moved through us, and that's how we historically survived, 60s, 70s, until we started to realize there was, elevated levels of salts and metals that were definitely causing problem. The passage of the Central Valley Project Improvement Act and this big drainage issue was not coincidental. And so it really was thought that this newfound fresh federal surface water supply would really mitigate not only for the overall operations of the federal water project, but also this specific drainage unit that had caused some imparities to habitat and wildlife.
Yeah, you guys, I mean, the importance of what you guys are doing is incredible. And just speaking for the last 25 minutes, it's very obvious that you guys have such an impact on California waterfowl in general. What do you guys play as a role in the migration of waterfowl through the state of California?
So I can speak to this, Alan. You please add on. We see bird, just waterfowl counts, mid-December, late December, at least a couple million waterfowl, about 500,000 shorebirds are moving through us. But in that ranges, it obviously was far greater at certain times. But a really important role. We're one of the Western Hemispheric Shorebird Reserve Network sites. That's a designation that puts very few wetlands into a category of global importance, right? This isn't just migratory birds in California or the continental United States or even North America. It really is paramount that we have these designations, so we maintain awareness of the importance of these areas. We're also one of the most important overwintering sites for migratory birds on Earth, and really important from an energetics perspective. The Sac Valley is producing a lot of rice. That rice decomposes, creates a lot of invertebrates, but they're on a schedule that has to fit in with their production cycle, right? That really is agriculture at the end of the day. So once the rice fields are dried out and they start to work the dirt, we get a big influx of birds, and so we're really the late winter, December, January, February, March. There's really no other game in town. We've lost the Tulare Lake wetlands. We've lost, the Klamath. It's pretty alarming how big of a role we play in terms of meeting the needs of the flyway on an annual basis. And it's not just for water birds, right? It's 400 species, 40 of which are listed as either threatened or endangered. A very important biodiversity hub, and it's right smack dab in the Central Valley of California.
Ellen, can you talk about your role with the Water District and why that is so important?
Yeah, I was working in a law firm in 2014, working with Rick as a client when he came on board as general manager back in 2011. So 2011 to 2014, I was their outside general counsel. It was one of my clients, and the drought of 14, 15 was so rough for grasslands. We faced a lawsuit that threatened to take away our water supply. We had just so many challenges, and I think Rick was calling me every day with legal questions about our water rights and what we should do. And what happened during that era as well is that the creativity in solving problems and coming up with new solutions was through the roof. I look back on that time, and I think it really catalyzed this moment in the history of the grasslands where we said, okay, if the federal government isn't going to come in and get this water for us and solve our problems, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And in the cooperation with the Bureau and in cooperation with our nonprofit partners and other water agencies, and a few in particular down there who happen to have conservationists and hunters on their staff and board, we just started planning projects. We have since built a really amazing water recirculation project in cooperation with the San Luis Water District. We are participating in a recycled water project to receive recycled water after the irrigation season ends from the local cities in our area, Modesto, Turlock, through the Del Puerto Water District. We are involved in planning the expansion of Los Vaqueros Reservoir with the Bay Area agencies, water agencies, some of the municipal agencies, and we're reoperating the Los Banos Creek Reservoir in partnership with our neighbors, the exchange contractors. This kind of stuff started happening, and it was like contract after contract after contract. So I oftentimes sit in a room with Rick and other water agency leaders as they discuss for hours how to make these solutions work and these collaborations, how to finance them, what the arrangements are going to be with respect to money and water and the infrastructure. And then we go out, we try to find the money, we write the contracts, apply for grants. I also do a lot of policy and advocacy at the federal level and at the state level, right? So we have a few bills along with California Waterfowl Association that we're trying to work on this year at the state level. But the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Reclamation, those are Department of Interior agencies that are responsible for managing the habitat and providing the water to us. There are a ton of policy decisions being made almost on a weekly basis about how to operate that system. And if you're not in the room talking with the decision makers, you're going to be left out of those decisions. So we are involved almost daily with the various water agencies and the federal agencies that run the Central Valley Project to make sure that that our water supplies are given the attention they deserve. And so it's just an ongoing it's a never-ending battle. It's a never-ending engagement with people in charge of our California water system to make sure that habitat and water supplies are considered. And it's kind of hard to describe because it's not as easy as filing a bunch of lawsuits and being in court every day, although we do that. We are in court as well. Grasslands is not a very litigious agency, so we try very hard to build partnerships to understand where people are coming from and to find solutions that aren't win-lose. So when we're in court, it's usually because we need to defend our interests. We're in a defensive posture. But it's a little bit of everything that I do for the district. And that includes things like this, like just educating folks about the importance of our area and our water supplies, making trips back to DC with Rick and our board members. I'm involved with the nonprofit groups, and and I'm a lawyer, so obviously, that's the law and the policy. So writing a lot of contracts, reviewing a lot of plans, and being involved in litigation only when necessary, I'd say, has been my role.
But have you always had a passion for water and the outdoors and hunting, fishing communities?
I grew up in rural upstate New York. My dad's a hunter, fisherman. I was fishing. My dad says I learned to count by catching sunfish and putting them in a bucket and throwing them back in the lake, right? So I always grew up by the water and has been involved. I lived in the Pacific Northwest for a long time, so I'm a big outdoors person. I love hiking. I love getting out in nature. But the waterfowl hunting community did not register on my radar until I got involved with Grasslands, and it just became my passion to preserve these habitats, fight for their water supplies. I love the people. I love the energy. And, I've gotten out in the blind. Yeah. Maybe I go out a couple times a year, right? So I'm not an expert, but I'm appreciative of the embrace that this community has shown me, because I felt like a little bit of an outsider. I'm just a water rights lawyer, right? But now I really do feel like a true member of the community. And I think that speaks to just the passion and I don't know, it's something special, right? This group we've got in California, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So Rick, as the general manager for the Grasslands Water District, what is your role there specifically?
What is it?
Kind of everything that Ellen said as well. We wear a lot of hats. We are a small team, but we're pretty mighty. We've got an excellent staff. I've got about 20 full-time employees and probably half a dozen consultants that we work with collectively. But it's everything, right? It's making sure we we've got the finances to continue to do the things that we need to do. So in a lot of ways, it's like running a small business. We're aggressively chasing public dollars because we don't want all of that cost to maintain all of this infrastructure to be borne by the hunter, right? We have, obviously there are wealthy hunters out there, but there's a lot of not wealthy hunters out there, including myself. So, we try to keep the costs down, the cost of entry down, and a lot of that is making sure that the clubs and their members aren't paying, out the teeth. But every step of the way along that, we're fighting urban encroachment and land use conversion. So we act as a land conservancy. We run a resource conservation district that right now is doing a lot of really cool pollinator habitat work around wetlands and along our conveyance systems. I oversee a groundwater sustainability agency. So our planning area for our groundwater sustainability agency is about 115,000 acres, includes the state and federal lands in Merced County, in addition to our service area. So SGMA's been eating up a tremendous amount of bandwidth capacity and financial resources, unfortunately. I don't think it was the intent of the authors, but it's extremely burdensome on an area that's frankly very sustainable. We're putting 300,000 acre feet of surface water on the ground every year and pumping about 1% of that out. But we still have to jump through all the regulatory hoops and hurdles, hire the hydrogeologists, and spend millions of dollars explaining how wetlands aren't a bad thing. So we're dead focused on that. There's lots of other things happening in the regulatory space that could impact us, like the new update to the biological opinions for the operation of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, the new State Water Resource Control Board, Water Quality Control Plan. These things are going to have major implications on wetlands in the state. So although we have a priority and a focus around our area, there's not a lot of entities like us really pushing back for even other areas of the state. And so we do a fair amount of that work as well. And then we're very involved in legislation and policy, for fending off the attacks, but also looking for opportunities, especially funding opportunities to hopefully close the gap on this long-standing unmet mandate. We're 32 years in to CVPIA, and there are many refuges that still do not have the physical conveyance to receive their water supply. And those that do have that conveyance in place have only received their full water supply 3 times in the last 3 decades. It's frankly unacceptable. We've got a lot of challenges and problems out there, but we just got to keep it in the public's eye that these wetlands are very important, and the least of which is the importance of being able to shoot waterfowl over them. Wetlands are replenishing drinking water aquifers. They're stripping contaminants like nitrogen out of the system. They're slowing the disposition of sediment and erosion. They're providing tremendous flood control, keeping these communities safe. In a changing climate, we really have to emphasize the importance of these things, because otherwise we're just going to be reducing and diminishing, even if it's not at the forefront of folks' minds.
Yeah, you kind of rolled right into the next question I have for you guys. So I know we've talked about, how great you guys have been doing. It's been amazing. But what's the next biggest threat to the Grasslands Ecological Area, or that you see for the Grasslands Water District? Is it the biological opinions? Is it encroachment, drought, high speed? Like what are you guys looking to on the forefront that you see as something that's going to be a big threat to the safety of the ecological area?
I'll let you go first, Ellen.
What's the biggest threat? Let's just move away from water and talk about encroachment. We use that term generally to refer to development and projects that eat away at the buffer zone between the agriculture that surrounds us and the habitat itself. One thing we've worked really closely with CWA on for at least 15 years is mitigating and addressing the impacts of the high-speed rail project. That rail project is going to go right through our wetlands, and for years we've fought to try and avoid, reduce, minimize, and mitigate the impacts of that. It's going to be a really fast-moving train that goes by every 5 minutes at 225 miles an hour at dusk, at the commute times, especially, right?
Shoot times.
Dawn and dusk. Yeah. So the times when the birds are active is, it's just, we see it as a big threat. And that's just one example, but we've managed to slowly, we're still negotiating, but we've managed to slowly gain more and more protections from that project. So we're going to do a bird tunnel. So the area that's most sensitive in the grasslands, it's going to be fully enclosed, and the train is going to go through a full enclosure so that it won't have the kind of startle effect we're hoping. And we're still working on the noise modeling for that and what's it going to be built out of, right? We negotiated a route that we think is hopefully the least damaging, and that took a long time. And we negotiated the offset of impacts through the acquisition of thousands of acres of new easements. So that is something that that's just an example, but urban encroachment and the slow kind of retirement of farmland and the demand for housing in the Central Valley, coupled with, a lot of people wanting to build. They want to build new communities down there in our area, in Santa Nella, in Gustine, in Los Banos. And they're slowly expanding their boundaries, merging together, and looking for water to support new communities. That has been a big focus of our district for a long time. There's a story about a golf course community that was going to be developed right next to us in the 90s, and our board president, Pepper Snyder, negotiating with the developer and trying to finagle with him about how it could be done in a way that was compatible with the habitat. And he started suggesting that the golf carts should be camo, and that all the golfers should be required. And he was kind of just messing with the guy. We ended up defeating that proposal. But there's constantly ideas for land use changes that are just incompatible with the peace and the quiet and the buffer that we need to keep our wetland healthy. So that, I think that's probably something that's on the horizon that we're just going to have to be pretty worried about and really vigilant about.
I think I agree. Encroachment is something that we need to stay focused on. What keeps me up at night are seasons like the one that we just had, and folks losing interest in the sport. The 11% excise tax that's going to be hitting to guns and ammo. At a certain point, folks are going to find different passions. And the passion of waterfowling in the area is what kept this place alive, kept alive the largest remaining wetland in the West, right? That's 2/3 privately held. And, so I worry about, our hunting population aging out. A lot of, the average age of a landowner in my district is in their 70s, and they skipped a generation. We don't see a lot of folks in their 40s or 30s taking up the sports. Occasionally you get the grandkids that are following out Papa, which is great and amazing and beautiful. But I just worry with all the cost of everything going up. That financial backbone is what created the rest of this, created our ability to hire great attorneys like Ellen to fight these battles, allows us to continue to efficiently deliver, hundreds of thousands of acre feet to habitat on an annual basis. So that's the stuff that keeps me up. I think we're up for the fight, but we got to make sure that we've got this financial backbone, protecting this area, fighting for its water, and trying to preserve it for as long as possible.
Yeah, definitely. No, that all makes sense to me, and sounds like you guys are already one step ahead, which is great. We're kind of getting to the end of this episode, but I want to pass it to John. If John, you have anything to add, then I'll give it back to Ellen and Rick if they have anything they'd like to add before we close out today.
Well, I'm just really happy you both came on today, and you are superstars. I mean, there's no doubt about it. In the world of wetland conservation and both private and public, you're the greatest partners we have. I mean, you get right up there. You have to give yourselves a pat on the back. I have a quick little story, and many, many years ago when I was in college up at Humboldt State, I competed on a wildlife quiz team, a quiz bowl team that competed all across the West with all the other wildlife schools. There was a trivia question that they still use today, and it was across the country, which county kills more ducks per capita per duck hunter in the whole country? And I think you guys probably know the answer to that. Right, Rick? Merced County. And I remember hearing that, and I thought, this was back in the 80s that I was competing. I'm like, there's no way. I mean, Louisiana, think of the Mississippi Flyway, but it still holds today. I'm sure it still holds today. If anybody listening has not been in the grasslands, late December, early January, when the teal have descended on the grasslands, you got to get down there and try it. You can't say you're a duck hunter unless you've ever tried that. It's unbelievable, unbelievable.
It can be pretty
And all the
special
work,
down there.
yes, and all the work you all are doing, Rick, Alan, we appreciate it so much, and we'll be your partners right in the trenches forever. That's for sure.
Ellen, do you have anything you'd like to add before we close out of here?
I'm just noticing your hat says California Waterfowl was formed in 1945, and that's about when the Grassland Water District was formed. So it's interesting that we have been around as entities and doing this work for about the same amount of time. We have a big legacy. I mean, just to walk in the shoes of those who came before us and have been doing this work for so long is what kind of keeps me going. And I just thought that was pretty neat that we have the same same historical longevity. 80 years is
like-minded,
a lot.
like-minded.
Definitely. Rick, what about yourself? Any last remarks?
I adding on to that, it's just a testament to folks coming together when, the federal government was frankly trying to change the landscape and really wasn't considerate of the importance of these areas. And they've come a long way. We work very closely with them on a lot of fronts. We're making great progress on a lot of these fronts. So I don't want it to seem or end it on a doom and gloom note. Ellen's been able to negotiate some really great language into the biological opinions. We're going to keep the fight up. We're going to need the fight from you guys. We need your donors. Your donors work hand in hand on all of our major policy priorities. So open up your hearts and your wallets. Keep hunting ducks, and let's get those kids in the blind.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Rick. And thank you, Ellen, for coming on. John, appreciate it as always. And make sure to listen to more episodes of Save for the Blind. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Save It for the Blind podcast. You can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.